The hall was filled with the soft hum of people talking, a sound that mixed with the faint echo of tuning instruments. The lights above the stage glowed warmly, touching every corner of the grand auditorium. It was one of those evenings where something important was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. The audience sat waiting, whispering, holding their programs close, reading the list of performers. Near the side of the stage, a young woman stood quietly, holding her fingers together, trying to hide how nervous she was. She had been waiting for this day for months. Every morning before sunrise, she had practiced. Every night before sleeping, she would replay her mistakes in her mind, promising herself that tomorrow would be better. This was her dream since childhood, to play in front of a real audience, not just her teacher or her reflection in the piano's glossy surface. But dreams often come wrapped in fear, and that fear was sitting right beside her heart that evening. Backstage was busy with people moving in every direction, contestants checking their music sheets, assistants fixing microphones, and judges preparing their notes. Among the judges sat a man everyone seemed to notice. He was famous for being brilliant but also cold. People said he could tell everything about a person's talent with just a few seconds of listening. He had a way of making performers feel small with only one sentence. Some even feared his words more than the performance itself. The young woman had heard stories about him too. Some said he had ruined careers with his cruel comments. Others said he was honest and wanted only the best. She didn't know which version to believe, but either way, she hoped he would see something good in her playing. She wanted to prove that she belonged on that stage. A voice echoed through the speakers, calling her name. Her heart jumped. She looked down at her hands one last time, wiped them on her dress, and took a deep breath. Then she walked toward the light. As she stepped onto the stage, the noise of the audience faded. She could only hear her own footsteps and the faint beating of her heart. The piano stood in the center, polished and grand, shining under the soft golden lights. It looked beautiful but somehow intimidating, like it was waiting to test her courage. She gave a small bow to the audience. The room was silent now, waiting. She sat down and adjusted the bench just like she had done 1,000 times before. But as she reached for her sheet music, she noticed something wrong. The small clip that held the pages together had come loose and the sheets were slipping. One of them fell onto the floor. A small sound echoed and a few people in the crowd laughed softly. She bent down to pick it up, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't a big mistake, but in that silent room, even the smallest thing felt huge. She tried to stay calm, but she could feel her face getting warm. And then, from the front row, a man's voice rose clearly. "If she's this unprepared, I can only imagine how she plays," he said. The audience turned toward him. A few laughed, some gasped. It was the same strict judge, the one known for his sharp tongue. The young woman froze for a second. She felt her chest tighten, her eyes burning slightly. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was disappointment. She had worked so hard, and now, before even playing a single note, she had become the target of mockery. For a moment, she wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open and take her away from all those eyes watching her. But then she heard a whisper inside her head. Her teacher's voice from long ago. "Never let them silence your music. When words try to break you, let your sound speak instead." She sat up straight again. The sheet music was back in place. Her fingers rested gently on the keys. The crowd was still quiet, watching closely, curious to see what she would do next. Even the judge who insulted her leaned back, arms crossed as if waiting to be proven right. She took a deep breath. The lights felt hotter now, but she didn't mind. Her heart was still racing, but her mind started to calm. She remembered the countless mornings when she played the same piece over and over, until her fingers hurt, until the notes became a part of her heartbeat. She closed her eyes for a second and began to play a few soft notes just to feel the instrument respond. The piano answered her touch like an old friend. Slowly, she found her rhythm again. The audience watched her every move as if the entire room was breathing with her. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the judge, the mistake, or the people watching. She was thinking only about the music, about how it always told her story when she couldn't find words. But just as she was about to start the full piece, a faint crackle from the microphone startled her. She looked up, unsure if she should continue. A few people in the crowd shifted in their seats. She smiled softly, deciding not to wait for perfection anymore. Life rarely gave that. She began to play, her fingers gliding across the keys with grace and confidence she didn't even know she still had. The notes filled the hall, clear and strong, echoing against the walls. Even those who had laughed before fell silent. The judge, who had insulted her, raised his eyebrow slightly, surprised by how calm and steady her playing was. She played the opening melody like a whisper, then let it rise into a powerful storm of sound. Her emotions poured out through every note, the fear, the anger, the hope, the courage. As she played, memories flashed in her mind. The first time she touched a piano at a local community center, the nights she practiced while her friends were out having fun, the moments when her family encouraged her, even when they couldn't afford lessons. Every memory became part of the music. The audience couldn't see her past, but they could feel it in the way she played. It wasn't just technique, it was truth. When she reached the final notes, she held them gently, letting the sound fade like the last breath of a dream. The room was silent for a few seconds, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then the applause began, soft at first, then louder until it filled the hall. She smiled, a small, humble smile, the kind that comes when you know you gave everything you had. She stood up, bowed again, and looked toward the judge's table. The man who had insulted her earlier was still clapping, though slowly, almost as if he didn't want to admit he was impressed. Their eyes met for a moment. There was no anger in hers, only quiet strength. Then she walked off the stage, her steps light, her heart full. Backstage, a few other contestants came to her, whispering words of encouragement. Some said she inspired them. One of the assistants handed her a bottle of water and smiled, saying, "That was brave." She nodded, still catching her breath, still replaying the performance in her head. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged there. Outside, the night air was cool and gentle. She looked up at the sky and smiled again, not because she had won or proved anything, but because she had found her voice in a moment when it could have been lost. That night would stay with her forever, not as the night she was insulted, but as the night she rose above it. When she walked off the stage that night, her heart was still racing. The sound of the applause echoed in her mind long after it stopped. She had done it. She had faced the fear, the insult, the pressure, and she had played anyway. But even though the audience had loved her performance, she knew the real test wasn't over yet. The judges' scores would decide everything. Backstage, the other performers gathered in small groups, whispering about their turns, about who might win. Some smiled at her as she passed. Others looked at her with a quiet kind of respect. She could still feel the heat of the lights on her skin. But underneath it all, there was a calm she hadn't felt in months. She found a small chair in the corner and sat down, taking slow breaths. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about being perfect. She was just proud that she hadn't walked away. A stage assistant came by with a clipboard and smiled kindly. "You did great," he said softly. The judges looked surprised. She thanked him, still trying to steady her shaking hands. She thought about what the man in the front row had said before she started. That cruel comment that had cut through her confidence. For a moment, she had hated him. But now, after everything, she wasn't angry. She almost felt grateful because his words had pushed her to play harder, with more heart than ever before. From the stage, she could hear the next contestant beginning to play. The sound of another piano filled the air, bright, fast, full of energy. She closed her eyes and listened. It was good, maybe even perfect. For a moment, she wondered if her performance would be enough. But then she remembered what her teacher once told her. People might forget your name, but they won't forget how you made them feel. She hoped that tonight, she had made them feel something real. After the competition ended, all the performers were called back to the stage. The bright lights returned, blinding at first. The audience clapped again as each person lined up, waiting for the results. She could see the judges talking quietly among themselves, marking something on their sheets. The man who had insulted her earlier seemed deep in thought. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. He just looked at her for a long time, as if trying to understand something. The host walked to the microphone and began to speak, thanking everyone for their performances. She barely heard his words. Her mind was too busy replaying everything that had happened. Her fingers still tingled from playing. Her body still felt the rhythm. She didn't even care much about winning anymore. She just wanted to know if she had earned their respect. The third-place winner was announced first. A young man stepped forward, smiling proudly as he accepted his certificate. The crowd cheered. Then came the second-place announcement, a woman who had played just before her. The applause rose again. Now there was only one name left. The host paused for a moment, making the audience lean forward in silence. She could hear her own heartbeat again, faster and louder than before. "And the first prize goes to," he said, opening the envelope slowly, "contestant number 12. There was a brief pause, and then she realized that was her number. For a moment, she didn't move. She just stared, trying to understand what had happened. The crowd began clapping, cheering, calling out. Someone touched her shoulder, urging her forward. Her legs felt weak, but she walked to the front, blinking against the lights. The host handed her the trophy, small but shining beautifully, and congratulated her. As the audience continued to applaud, she looked toward the judges' table. The same man who had insulted her earlier was now standing, clapping along with the others. Their eyes met again. This time there was something different in his face. Not pity, not pride, but respect. Maybe even apology. She gave a small nod before turning back to the crowd, lifting the trophy slightly. It wasn't pride she felt, it was peace. When the event finally ended, people crowded around to congratulate her. Some wanted photos, others just wanted to shake her hand. She smiled politely, though her mind was still spinning. She had come here hoping just to play well. Winning had never been part of her imagination. It all felt unreal. Later that night, after everyone had left, she returned to the empty stage. The lights were dim now, and the hall was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. She walked up to the same piano she had played on earlier. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the black surface. She reached out and touched the keys lightly. "We did it," she whispered with a small smile. It wasn't the piano she was talking to, it was herself. She sat down for a moment, looking out at the empty seats. She imagined the people who had been sitting there just hours ago. The laughter, the silence, the applause. She thought about how close she had been to giving up when that insult cut through her, and then she thought about how instead of breaking her, it had pushed her forward. Maybe that was life. Sometimes you needed the hurt to find your strength. She stayed there for a while, lost in thought, until she heard soft footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw the man from the judges' table. He walked slowly, holding a folder under his arm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "You played beautifully tonight." His voice was softer now, without the sharp edge it had before. "I shouldn't have said what I did earlier. That was unkind." She didn't know what to say. She had imagined what she'd tell him if she ever got the chance, that his words had hurt, that he had made her doubt herself. But now, seeing him there, she realized she didn't need to say any of that. He already knew. So she just nodded and said, "Thank you." He smiled faintly, nodded back, and turned to leave. But before walking away, he stopped and said, "You reminded me tonight what real music sounds like. Don't ever lose that." Then he walked off into the darkness of the hall. She sat there for a long time after he left. His words stayed with her. They weren't praise exactly, they were something deeper. It was as if he had admitted that her music had reached him, despite everything. And maybe that was the best victory she could have hoped for. When she finally stepped outside, the night air felt cool and fresh. The city lights twinkled in the distance. She could still hear faint music coming from a nearby street, someone playing a violin under the soft glow of a lamppost. It made her smile. Music was everywhere if you listened closely enough. She walked home with her trophy in hand, not caring about the weight of it. It wasn't the prize that mattered. It was what it represented: courage, resilience, and the decision to keep playing when everything tried to stop her. She thought about how many times she had almost quit, how many times fear had whispered that she wasn't enough. And yet, here she was. When she reached home, her family was waiting up for her. They had been watching the live stream of the competition. The moment she walked through the door, they rushed to her, hugging her tightly, laughing and crying all at once. The trophy passed from hand to hand, everyone admiring it as if it were made of gold. But what touched her most wasn't the celebration. It was the pride in their eyes. They sat together for hours, talking about everything: the audience, the music, the moment she won. When she told them about the insult, her father's smile faded for a second. "That must have been hard," he said softly. She nodded. "It was," she admitted, "but maybe I needed it." They didn't understand at first, but she tried to explain how that moment of humiliation had turned into the spark she needed. When everyone finally went to bed, she stayed up by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The city was asleep, but her heart was wide awake. She thought about the next day, the next dream, the next stage. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, people would still talk about the night she was insulted on stage. But for her, it wasn't a story about embarrassment anymore. It was a story about courage, about refusing to break, about turning pain into power. And maybe one day she would tell it herself. Not as a victim, but as someone who learned how to rise. The clock ticked softly in the background. She took one last look at the trophy on her desk, its surface catching the faint moonlight. Then she whispered quietly, "Tomorrow I'll play again." And with that, she smiled and closed her eyes, finally at peace. The morning after the competition felt like a dream. Sunlight slipped through the curtains and the golden light touched the small trophy sitting on her desk. For a few seconds, she just stared at it, still half asleep, trying to believe that everything had really happened. The sound of the crowd, the applause, the feeling of the piano under her fingers. All of it came rushing back like a beautiful memory she didn't want to end. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Friends, classmates, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years were sending congratulations. Some said they had watched the video online. Others said they were proud of her courage. She smiled at their kind words, but she didn't respond right away. She wanted to hold the quiet moment a little longer. The night had changed her in ways she couldn't yet explain. Downstairs, her family was already awake. The smell of breakfast filled the air and laughter echoed from the kitchen. When she walked in, everyone clapped playfully, cheering again like they had done the night before. Her little brother ran up to her, pretending to hold an invisible microphone. "Tell us how it feels to be famous," he joked, making everyone laugh. She smiled and shook her head. "I'm not famous," she said softly. "I just played my music." But deep down, she knew something inside her had shifted. She wasn't the same nervous person who had stepped onto that stage. She had faced her fear and walked through it. Her father poured her a cup of tea and said, "You know, sometimes life gives you one hard moment to show you who you really are." She nodded, letting his words sink in. She thought of the judge's harsh comment, the laughter from the crowd, and how close she had been to giving up. That one painful moment had forced her to rise. Maybe that was how strength was born, not from comfort but from challenge. Later that day, her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a message from an unknown number. It was from one of the organizers of the competition. The message read, "We'd like to invite you to perform again at our charity event next month. Your story inspired many people." She stared at the message for a while, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't just a performance invitation. It was proof that her music had touched people beyond that one night. She accepted without hesitation. Over the next few days, her life began to feel different. People started recognizing her when she went out. At the music school where she practiced, students she barely knew smiled at her in the halls. Teachers congratulated her and asked about her performance. It felt strange but also warm. For so long, she had been just another student practicing quietly in the corner. Now people saw her differently. But with the new attention came pressure. The charity event would be bigger, televised, with a larger audience and more professional musicians. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. Every evening after school, she sat at the piano for hours, practicing until her shoulders ached and her eyes grew heavy. Sometimes the sound of her own playing filled her with joy. Other times it frustrated her. She wanted every note to be perfect, but perfection started to feel like a moving target. One evening, after several hours of practice, she stopped and stared at the piano keys. Her fingers hovered above them, but no sound came out. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a clock. For the first time, she felt unsure of herself again. The fear she thought she had left behind started creeping back in. The fear of failing, of disappointing people, of not being good enough. She sighed and closed the lid of the piano gently. The next morning, she decided to take a break and walk through the park near her home. The air was cool and the leaves rustled softly in the wind. On one of the benches, she saw an older man playing a small harmonica. The tune was simple but full of feeling. She stopped to listen for a while. When he finished, she clapped quietly and he looked up with a smile. "Music sounds better when someone listens," he said. She sat down beside him and they talked for a while. He told her he used to play in small cafes when he was younger. "It's not about being perfect," he said. "It's about being honest with your music. If you play from the heart, people will hear it." His words felt like a quiet answer to her worries. Before she left, he smiled again and said, "Remember, even broken notes can sound beautiful if they come from truth." Those words stayed with her. That night she went back to her piano, not to chase perfection but to find honesty again. She played the same song she had performed at the competition, but this time it felt different. The notes flowed more freely without pressure or fear. It was like she was talking to herself through music, telling her own heart that she was enough. As the days passed, she grew more confident. The night of the charity event arrived quickly. The venue was larger than the one before, filled with bright lights and cameras. Backstage was buzzing with excitement, musicians tuning instruments, sound engineers checking microphones, and performers chatting nervously. She sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded on her lap, waiting for her turn. When her name was announced, she took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The audience looked endless this time, but she didn't feel the same fear she once did. Instead, she felt a calm energy, like she belonged there. The piano stood in the center again, waiting for her touch. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and closed her eyes for a moment. The noise faded, replaced by a deep, peaceful silence. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft and tender, like a whisper to the soul. Slowly, the melody grew stronger, richer, more alive. The room seemed to breathe with her. Every sound carried emotion, every note felt like a story. Somewhere in the audience, she imagined the judge from that first night listening. She hoped he would hear how much she had grown, how much that single night had shaped her. When the final note faded, the applause came like a wave, loud and warm. She stood up, bowed deeply, and smiled. She could feel tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. She had played not for trophies or recognition, but for herself, for the part of her that refused to give up. After the performance, several people came up to her. Some thanked her for the music. Others said her story had inspired them. One woman even said, "You reminded me to try again." Hearing that made her realize that her journey had become more than personal. It was something others could see themselves in. It wasn't just about playing anymore. It was about giving people hope through her courage. Later that night, when the event ended, she walked out into the quiet street again. The air was cool and the city lights shimmered like distant stars. She carried no trophy this time, but her heart was lighter than ever. As she walked, she passed a small cafe with an old piano near the window. Without thinking too much, she went inside and asked the owner if she could play for a few minutes. The owner smiled and nodded. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play softly. There were only a few people inside, sipping coffee and chatting quietly, but one by one they turned to listen. The song she played wasn't planned, it just came from her heart. The kind of melody that doesn't need an audience to exist. When she finished, the people clapped gently and one of them whispered, "Beautiful." She smiled, thanked them, and left. Outside, she looked up at the night sky again and whispered to herself, "Music doesn't need a stage, it just needs honesty." And in that moment, she realized something important. What had started as one painful night of embarrassment had turned into a journey of growth, courage, and truth. She walked home slowly, feeling proud but humble. Every sound around her, the wind in the trees, the distant sound of traffic, felt like part of a bigger song. A song that reminded her that life, like music, was about rhythm and emotion, not perfection. When she reached home, she saw the light still on in her room. The small trophy on her desk caught the glow, but she didn't see it as a prize anymore. It was a reminder of that night when she was insulted, humiliated, and yet somehow found her strength. She sat by the window again, looked out at the quiet street, and smiled softly. She knew her journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt. But now she had something stronger than fear. She had faith in herself. She had learned that no matter who tries to bring you down, what truly defines you is how you rise after falling. As she closed her eyes that night, she whispered to herself, "Keep playing, no matter what." And with that, sleep came gently, carrying her dreams forward into another new beginning. Months passed after the charity event, and her life slowly began to change in quiet but beautiful ways. People still remembered her performance and the story behind it. A few local newspapers had even written small pieces about her journey. She didn't think of herself as famous, but she could tell her music had touched hearts beyond what she ever imagined. Sometimes strangers sent her letters saying how her courage had inspired them to chase their own dreams again. Despite the growing attention, she tried to live her life as normally as possible. Every morning she still practiced on the same old piano by the window. The keys were slightly worn from years of use, but she loved them. They carried every emotion she had ever poured into them: fear, hope, joy, sadness. Each sound reminded her why she had started in the first place. Not for trophies, not for fame, but for the feeling that music gave her, the way it healed something deep inside. One afternoon, while she was practicing, an email arrived from a well-known music school in another city. They had seen her performance online and wanted to invite her to audition for a special scholarship program. Her heart raced as she read the message. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it also meant leaving her family, her home, and everything familiar behind. She sat there quietly for a long time thinking about it. Change was exciting, but it was also scary. That evening, she told her family about the invitation. They listened carefully, smiling with pride but also with a little worry. Her mother reached out and held her hand, saying softly, "If your heart is telling you to go, then go. We'll always be here." Her father nodded in agreement. "Opportunities like this don't come often," he said. "You've worked hard for this. Don't be afraid to take the next step." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept imagining what life would be like in a new city. The people, the music, the lessons, the competition, it all seemed overwhelming. But underneath the fear there was excitement. The thought of learning more, growing more, and proving to herself that she could stand on any stage made her smile. By morning, her decision was made. She was going to take the chance. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. She practiced for hours, perfecting her audition piece. She read about the school, the teachers, and the other students who had studied there. Some of them were now famous performers who played around the world. The idea that she could follow in their footsteps both thrilled and frightened her. When the day finally came, she packed her small suitcase, hugged her family tightly, and set off for the new city. The journey was long, but she spent most of it looking out the window, watching the changing scenery and thinking about how far she had come since that first competition. She remembered the fear she had felt when she was insulted on stage, and how that single moment had changed everything. It reminded her that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about moving forward even when fear tried to stop you. When she arrived at the school, she was amazed. The building was large and filled with music. Every room seemed alive with the sound of instruments: violins, cellos, flutes, and of course pianos. She felt both small and inspired at the same time. The students looked confident, carrying their music sheets and chatting about performances. She wondered if she would ever fit in among them. Her audition was scheduled for the next day. That night, she stayed in a small room provided by the school. She sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere down the street, she could hear someone playing a piano through an open window. The melody was soft and steady, and it made her feel calm. She whispered to herself, "You've done this before. You can do it again." Then she closed her eyes and imagined herself walking onto the stage with the same quiet strength she had once found in her darkest moment. The next morning, she woke up early, dressed simply, and made her way to the audition hall. The waiting area was filled with other hopeful musicians. Some looked nervous, others confident. She sat quietly, holding her music close to her chest, her fingers tracing the edge of the pages. When her name was called, she stood up slowly and walked to the stage. The hall was large, with tall ceilings and a row of judges sitting in front. She recognized one of them from a music documentary she had seen years ago. He was known for discovering young talent. She bowed politely and sat at the piano. The air felt heavy but familiar. She took a deep breath and began to play. Her fingers moved with grace, but more than that, they moved with truth. She didn't think about perfection or about impressing anyone. She played like she was telling her own story again. The struggle, the insult, the courage, the triumph. Each note carried a piece of her journey. By the time she reached the last note, she knew she had given everything she had. When she finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then one of the judges smiled and said, "Thank you. That was beautiful." She nodded, bowed again, and quietly walked out of the hall. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt at peace. She had played with her heart, and that was enough. A week later, she received an email from the school. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first line read, "Congratulations, you have been selected for the scholarship program." She gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. Tears filled her eyes as she read it again and again. She had done it. She had earned her place. The following months at the school were unlike anything she had experienced before. The classes were challenging, the teachers demanding, but she loved every moment of it. She met students from all over the world, each with their own story, their own reasons for loving music. Some were confident, some were shy, but all of them shared the same passion. There were moments when she doubted herself, especially when she heard others play flawlessly. But then she would remember where she came from and how far she had come. Every struggle had shaped her into who she was. Every challenge had made her stronger. One day, during a class performance, one of her teachers approached her afterward and said, "You have something special. Your playing has emotion that can't be taught." Those words stayed with her. She realized that while others might be technically perfect, her strength lay in the honesty of her music. As months turned into a year, she continued to grow, not just as a musician, but as a person. She learned discipline, patience, and humility. She also learned that music wasn't about competition. It was about connection. The more she shared her heart through her music, the more people connected with it. Near the end of the year, the school organized a grand concert. It was one of the biggest events, attended by famous musicians and critics. She was chosen to perform a solo piece, and though nervous, she felt ready. On the night of the concert, she stood backstage, listening to the applause for the performer before her. Her heart beat fast, but she smiled, remembering that first night years ago when fear had nearly silenced her. Not anymore. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. The hall was filled with people, but she only focused on the piano. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody rose softly at first, then grew into something powerful and emotional. Every sound told a story not just of her, but of everyone who had ever fought through doubt and pain to find their strength. As she played, she thought of her family, her teacher, and that one cruel comment that had once broken her heart. Without it, she might never have discovered this strength. When the final note faded, the audience stood and applauded. Some even had tears in their eyes. She bowed deeply, her heart full of gratitude. Later, when the concert ended, one of the senior professors approached her. "You have a rare gift," he said. "You don't just play music, you live it." She smiled, thanking him softly. That night she went back to her small room, opened the window, and let the cool air brush her face. The city lights shimmered below, and she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She knew her journey wasn't finished. There would always be more stages, more challenges, more music to play. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned that every mistake, every insult, every struggle could be turned into a note in the song of her life. And as long as she kept playing, that song would never end. Months had passed since the grand concert, and life at the music school had become her new rhythm. Every day brought fresh lessons, new faces, and deeper emotions through music. She had grown confident in her craft, but also humble in her understanding of it. She no longer saw music as a way to prove herself. It had become a way to connect, to give something meaningful to others. But one morning, she received a letter that made her pause. It was from her hometown's community center. They were organizing a cultural festival and wanted her to perform as the closing act. Reading those words brought back a wave of memories. The dusty old stage, the whispers of doubt, and that one public insult that had nearly broken her years ago. Now they were inviting her back to perform. The irony wasn't lost on her. For a moment she hesitated. Going back meant facing everything she had once tried to leave behind. But then she thought about how far she had come. She wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She was someone who had learned to turn pain into melody. And maybe this was her chance to close the circle, to play once more where it all began, but this time, not with fear, but with peace. She accepted the invitation. The weeks leading up to the event went by quickly. Between her classes and practice sessions, she worked on a new piece she had written herself. It wasn't a complicated composition. It was simple, but honest. It told the story of her journey, the struggle, the heartbreak, the growth, and the joy. Every note carried a piece of her soul. When the day finally came, she packed her bag and traveled back to her hometown. The moment she stepped off the bus, a flood of nostalgia hit her. The streets looked smaller, the air smelled familiar, and every corner held a memory. Some faces she passed recognized her immediately and smiled. They had heard about her achievements and felt proud that someone from their town had made it so far. At home, her parents welcomed her with open arms. The warmth of their embrace reminded her that no matter where life took her, this place would always be her foundation. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, her mother said softly, "You've come a long way, but it feels like you never really left." She smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. The next morning, she visited the community hall where she would perform. The building had been renovated, but she could still recognize the familiar corners. She stood on the stage for a moment, running her fingers along the piano keys. The memories of that day came rushing back, the laughter, the insult, the trembling hands. But now, instead of pain, she felt calm. Time had healed those wounds. As the evening of the performance approached, the hall filled with people. Some were locals who had watched her grow up. Others were students and music lovers who had come after hearing her name online. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and warmth. Backstage, she took a deep breath and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She saw someone who had faced fear and turned it into strength. Before she walked out, one of the event organizers approached her. "It's an honor to have you back here," they said. "You've made us all proud." She thanked them gently, then stepped toward the stage. When she appeared under the soft stage lights, the audience clapped warmly. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, she saw him, the man who had once insulted her years ago. He sat quietly in the middle rows, his expression unreadable. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly steadied herself. She wasn't here for revenge, she was here to play. She sat down at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play the first notes of her composition. The music started softly, almost like a whisper. It spoke of innocence and hope, then slowly grew into a melody of struggle and pain. The sound filled the hall, wrapping everyone in its emotion. As she played, she felt everything. The hurt, the courage, the forgiveness flow through her fingers. The crowd listened in silence, completely drawn in by the honesty of her performance. Halfway through, her eyes opened, and she caught a glimpse of him again. He wasn't looking away. Instead, his expression had softened, his eyes glistening slightly. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was regret. And in that moment, she understood something. Sometimes people hurt others not because they're cruel, but because they don't understand their own pain. She didn't need an apology. The music had already spoken for her. When the final note faded, there was a brief silence, then an eruption of applause. The entire audience stood, clapping and cheering. Some even had tears in their eyes. She smiled, bowing gracefully, her heart full of peace. That one moment, standing there on the same stage where she had once been humiliated, felt like a full circle. She had come back stronger, not to prove anything, but to share what she had learned, that pain can be turned into beauty. After the performance, many people came up to congratulate her. Old teachers, neighbors, and even students who had just started learning music. Each one had kind words, but she didn't expect what came next. The man who had once insulted her slowly walked toward her. He looked older now, his confident expression replaced with humility. For a moment, they stood in silence. Finally, he said softly, "I was wrong about you. I see that now. What you did tonight, it was extraordinary." She nodded gently, a kind smile on her face. "We all grow," she replied. "Sometimes it just takes time to see things clearly." He lowered his eyes, clearly moved by her words. Then, without another word, he walked away. She watched him go, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Life had taught her that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of the past. Later that night, as the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, she sat alone at the piano for a few more minutes. Her fingers touched the keys softly, playing a few random notes. Each sound echoed gently like a quiet goodbye to a chapter that had finally closed. She smiled to herself, knowing that everything that had once broken her had also built her. The next morning, she took a walk around her old neighborhood. Children were playing in the streets, their laughter filling the air. She passed by her old school, the park, and finally the small shop where she used to buy sheet music. The shopkeeper recognized her and waved, saying proudly, "Our very own star has returned." She laughed warmly and waved back. As she boarded the bus to return to the city, she looked out the window at her hometown fading in the distance. A gentle feeling of gratitude filled her heart. She realized that success wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about peace. And she finally had that. Back at the music school, her teachers and friends welcomed her with excitement, eager to hear how the concert had gone. When she told them about the experience, they listened in awe. "You didn't just play music," one of them said. "You told a story that will stay with people for years." She smiled, knowing that was all she ever wanted, to play from the heart, to remind others that no matter how hard life gets, there's always a way to turn pain into something beautiful. As she sat down to practice again that evening, the sun setting through the window, she felt the same peace she had felt on that stage. The kind of peace that comes when you've faced your past and finally made peace with it. And as the notes filled the room, she knew that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just another beginning. Years had passed since that unforgettable night in her hometown. Life had moved forward in ways she could never have imagined. The once shy girl who had been publicly insulted had now become a respected musician, admired not only for her talent, but also for her humility and heart. Her story had quietly traveled far beyond her country. People from different places wrote to her, saying her music had comforted them through their own struggles. She had become more than a performer. She had become a reminder that strength often grows from pain. Even though her name was now known in many places, she remained grounded. She still lived simply, waking up early to practice, teaching music to young students, and finding beauty in the smallest things. Her fame never changed her. Instead, it deepened her gratitude. She often said to her students, "Music isn't about showing off. It's about sharing what's inside you." Her schedule was busy, filled with concerts, interviews, and travel, but she always made time to visit her family and her hometown. Each visit reminded her where her journey began. The streets, the laughter, the warmth, it all made her feel alive in a way no grand stage ever could. One winter morning, while she was preparing for an upcoming international performance, she received an email from a well-known orchestra overseas. They wanted her to collaborate on a charity concert that would raise funds for children who had lost access to music education. The idea touched her deeply. Without hesitation, she agreed. The event was to be held in a beautiful concert hall in another country, a place she had never been before. She spent weeks preparing, practicing late into the night, perfecting every detail. But what excited her the most wasn't the fame or the prestige, it was the purpose behind it. She wanted to use her music to make a difference, to give something back. When she arrived in the new city, she was greeted warmly by the orchestra members. The hall where she would perform was breathtaking. Tall ceilings, golden lights, and rows upon rows of seats that seemed endless. It felt like a dream. But even as she stood there, she reminded herself of one simple truth. The stage didn't define her. The music did. During rehearsals, she quickly formed a bond with the musicians. They came from different backgrounds, speaking different languages. But when they played together, it was as if their hearts spoke the same one. Music had that kind of magic. It erased differences and built bridges where words sometimes failed. As the concert date approached, posters of her face appeared around the city. The tickets sold out quickly. Yet instead of feeling nervous, she felt calm. She had learned long ago that true confidence came not from trying to impress, but from being sincere. On the day of the concert, the hall was filled to the last seat. Famous personalities, critics, and families sat side by side. As she stood backstage, she thought of everything that had brought her to this moment. The insult, the tears, the long nights of practice, the victories, and the lessons. It all came together like the notes in a song, different yet perfectly connected. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The lights were bright, but she could still see faces in the crowd. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. The world seemed to go silent. And then, with a calm smile, she began to play. The piece she performed was a blend of classical and original music, filled with emotion and grace. Each note rose and fell like waves, carrying stories of pain, courage, and love. The orchestra followed her lead beautifully, the violins echoing her emotions, The cellos grounding them, the flutes adding lightness. It wasn't just a performance, it was a conversation between hearts. As she played, memories flooded her mind. The girl who once doubted herself, the teacher who had believed in her, the night she had faced humiliation, and the day she had turned it into triumph. It all played before her eyes like a movie, and yet she felt no pain, only gratitude. Halfway through, she glanced at the audience. Many were visibly moved. Some had tears glistening under the lights. That was when she realized something powerful. Her journey had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had always been about helping others believe they could rise too. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence so complete that it felt sacred. And then came the applause, a roaring wave that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. People stood clapping, cheering, and calling her name. She bowed deeply, tears in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of peace, the kind that only comes when you know you've lived your purpose. After the concert, reporters and fans surrounded her, but she stayed humble, smiling kindly and thanking everyone. One reporter asked, "You've inspired so many people. What message do you want to leave for those who are struggling?" She paused, thinking carefully before answering. She said softly, "Don't let someone else's words define your worth. Pain will visit you, but it doesn't have to stay. Use it, turn it into something beautiful. That's how you heal, not by forgetting, but by creating." Her words spread quickly, quoted in articles shared on social media, touching hearts around the world. In the months that followed, she continued to travel, perform, and teach, but deep down she began to dream of something new. She wanted to create a place where children could learn music no matter where they came from or how much money they had. A place where they could find their voice just as she had once found hers. So she started working quietly on a plan. With help from friends, donors, and her own savings, she eventually built a small music foundation in her hometown. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was filled with life. Old instruments were repaired, classrooms painted, and children's laughter echoed through the halls. Every week she visited the center, teaching, guiding, and listening to their stories. Watching them grow reminded her of her younger self, the girl who had once been unsure, but brave enough to try. One afternoon, while sitting in the practice room with a few of her students, a young boy asked her, "How did you become so strong?" She smiled, looking out the window for a moment before replying, "I wasn't always strong. I just didn't give up. Every time life pushed me down, I played again, one note at a time." The boy nodded, his eyes wide with admiration. Years later, her foundation grew into something much bigger than she had ever planned. Musicians from all over came to volunteer and perform. The walls that once echoed with her solo notes now sang with the sound of many. It was no longer just her story. It was everyone's. And though she continued to perform on big stages, her favorite moments were still the simplest ones. Sitting by the piano with her students, laughing, learning, and playing together. Those moments reminded her of what truly mattered. As she looked back on her life, she realized something profound. That painful day long ago when she had been insulted wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Without it, she might never have found the courage to rise, to fight, and to grow. Life, she thought, is like music. There are moments of silence, moments of chaos, and moments of harmony. But when you listen closely, every note has meaning. One evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat alone at the piano as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky outside was painted in shades of orange and gold. She began to play softly, not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. The melody was simple, tender, and full of life. It carried everything she had ever felt: pain, love, forgiveness, peace. As the last note faded into the quiet evening, she smiled. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She had already won the most important battle, the one within herself. Her journey had come full circle. From being insulted in front of a crowd to inspiring thousands through her music, she had transformed every wound into a song. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that as long as she had music, she would never truly be alone.